Welcome and to another lesson for your course. And today, as you read this and listen to this, we are exploring Canada's laws and policies. So the laws and policies are so important as they align with the material that you have been exploring in this course. All the wonderful changes, challenges that have unfolded throughout history, particularly in the area of rights and opportunities and protection, all stem in Canada from laws. And much of this is true for the rest of the world, as we have looked at different issues that have happened internationally, for instance, the United Nations and that Bill of Rights. But we're going to focus for the most part in this video on Canada. And I'll just make reference to just international laws as we go through. But I think it's so important that you understand how and why in the structure of all these laws and rules we have in Canada today, and how they begin, and sometimes why they begin, and what's involved. And sometimes understanding what's involved in a law helps you appreciate what exists today. So let's jump into it. So laws and policies. So I should be clear by saying laws and legislation can be considered like the same word. Policies flow from laws. So when laws are made and a law has to be implemented, right? It has to go into force. It often involves policy. So how are we going to do that? And that's generally with policies come into play. So how is this going to look in reality in our world? So laws and their policies have drastically changed over the centuries. And already what you've explored, I'm sure you can appreciate that. Some of the ways we live our lives today, you probably can't even imagine how it used to be 100, 150 years ago. Just think even the issue of voting rights, right? The right to vote, how that came about. It's almost unimaginable to think that, for instance, women at one time didn't have the right to vote. But like all things in life, everything is precarious. And I say that not to be an alarmist, but only to say that because we just have to keep our eyes on what's happening around us. And I'm going to dig into that statement a little bit more as we go forward. So hopefully the idea of laws is to do important positive things for its citizens. They provide us rights and opportunities, but I also like to say they provide us protection from harm. But they also, and as you drill down, when you think about policies and regulations, they also guide professional practice and competencies. And for many of you who may be pursuing certain jobs and employment in the future, you're going to soon discover that if you get into certain professions, that there are a lot of rules and laws regarding how you conduct yourself professionally. So it starts big when you think about it, but it definitely weaves its way down into our daily lives. So not only our own behavior, but our expectations as citizens as well. So according to the Department of Justice Canada, we have laws in our country to ensure a safe and peaceful society. The other important thing is laws in Canada apply to everybody. The expression that no one is above the law is what we also adhere to in Canada. So this includes police, government, and political officials, and that would include our prime ministers as well. And they provide guidance for us and what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior of people and organizations to have or to behave. And this is really important if you're new to our country, or you're new into a job, or you become a different age, because different laws relate to different ages as well. So it's really important to kind of learn kind of the structure and basic laws of society, not just to know what's entitled to you, but also what is you're responsible to have. So here are kind of the 4 principles of laws: protecting liberties and rights, establishing standards, maintaining order, and resolving disputes. So those are kind of vague terms. And obviously, every part of this lesson I'm doing today can be drilled down into even different courses. But we're given an overview as a way to wrap up our course and all the advancements and understanding you have gleaned from looking at gender, the the LGBTQ community, and understanding sociological terminology as it relates ultimately to also laws. And you'll see that when you think about what's norm, standards, all those different things. So why have laws? So in Canada, make sure you look at all the videos that are also part of this folder, because they're going to enhance and bolster this content. And even though this is a long video for you to listen to, you can deal with it a little parts at a time, but all the extra videos you have to look at and to review and the documentation are also going to enhance this content. So constitutional laws, that's our Charter of Rights and Freedom and our charter, highest law in Canada. That can't be said enough. And of course, it took really a few years to sort out to get it passed back in 1982. So again, the Charter of Rights and Freedom started, of course, the Charter, the Constitution, with the British North American Act when we became a country in 1867. And then, of course, it would be later changed in 1982 when we got our one step further as a Canadian society. Federal government enacts specific laws that are different, obviously, than provincial and municipal laws. And they cover a lot of different areas maybe you don't think about. So I'm just going to throw up a few extra that are kind of outside the kind of borders of our course, but I want you to think about how broadly laws impact our lives. So obviously, Aboriginal rights and reserves, criminal law. We think about criminal law. We talk about criminal law a lot. Modifications of our Constitution. So in case our Constitution needs to be changed, which it has since 1982, what's involved in that? Think of this one, navigating within our waters, or international law. Like, that's a big one. Patents, our armed forces, our federal penitentiaries, which is different than our provincial penitentiaries. So if you're going into a field of criminology, these are things that you're going to learn about. And you can just read the rest yourself. Marriage, we're going to talk about that, in divorce. So all different types, everything about our lives is kind of organized around laws and policies. Here's some examples of municipal laws you don't think about. Believe it or not, yes, we have the pooper scooper law. I just wanted to put that into a course. When parks can open, when parks can close, smoking laws, littering laws. Those are laws, they're just kind of small. Maybe we laugh about it. Maybe you don't care if there's poop in the parks, but those are laws that change because people wanted these issues addressed, which leads to what we're going to be looking at very shortly. So laws are passed by elected representatives at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. So what does this mean? Federal elections, provincial elections, and city elections. So who you vote for your mayor and your city councilor actually matters in terms of your day-to-day life. Maybe you don't think about it, but it's true. And what they stand for, what they believe in, is also important for you to understand. And then some other ones would be voting rights. Some rights are across Canada, no matter where you go, and some are provincial and some are municipal. So who creates these laws in Canada? How does it begin? So let's just do a brief overview, and I hope you like it. If you like this, you might be interested in taking a political science class. There's so many interesting courses that you could explore if you find some of this content interesting. So Canada's legislative process, so I'm starting now at the federal level, the big laws, involves all 3 parts of Parliament that work together to create new laws. And this includes what we call the House of Commons, which is elected. So think about our federal representatives, think about our prime minister, the Senate, which is actually appointed by the government. So we don't actually vote or pick our senators in Canada, but we do pick our elected officials, who is sitting in the House of Commons or Parliament, whatever word you're interested in. And then, believe it or not, the monarch, who is a head of state, and in our country is represented by the Governor General in Canada. And our Governor Generals are appointed also by the House of Commons, usually by the Prime Minister and a group, and it needs to generally be passed by what was forever the Queen for over 80 years, eventually now the King, King Charles now. But these are more, at this point in our history, rubber stamped, meaning they just happen. So important. The House of Commons is elected, and I bold the word elected because I can't stress enough, completely outside of our course, but the importance of voting. Because I hope when you finish this lesson, you'll understand why it matters who you send to Parliament, who you vote for. So here we go. Once again, who we vote for. All right. So the Parliament passes laws that affect the whole country. That's the federal government. Rights and protection again. Those are almost the normal ones we think about usually, but also protection of the environment, foods and drug safety. Just some other ideas to give to you. And even the rules about sending people to space. What are the rules for our astronauts? Like, I know those are random, but that is how far-reaching our laws are in our country. Where do bills come from? So I talked about who you send to Parliament, who is going to be representing you in the House of Commons. So they usually run from a particular political party. Now, in Canada, I just found this on the internet, 2019, those were in the federal election, those were the different parties that were running for government. And they ran under one of those banners. Were they from the Conservative, the Green, the Liberal, NDP, Bloc, whoever. And there are people who run as independent, so they don't identify with any of those parties. It happens. It's not as common, but it does happen. So these people who run for these parties will raise issues that their parties believe in. And so understanding throughout history what different parties believed in kind of explains to you why a lot of things happened and when they happened in history. And so when they are starting off, bills are written, bills are from ideas that start the process of a law potentially happening. So they're proposals. That's what they are. They're simply proposals. So let's look at this process then. How does a bill, where does it come from, and how does it eventually become a law? So again, Parliament determines it, 3 elements, 3 levels, the Crown, the Senate, and the House. So I said it backwards that way. And here we go. All right. So it begins with an idea. You can see that I circled it in the beginning. This is federal government too, by the way. Similar process happens in provincial and territorial governments as well. But I'm not going to get into all of those. So what happens is there's an idea that comes forward. Where does an idea come from? It comes from you, comes from me, comes from groups of people, comes from, I like to say, life's happenings, events are taking place, new concerns are happening. They can come from a political party because the people who are voting for them want to see a change. They want to see something new. This is the beauty of Canada and our laws. They're constantly changing and evolving. The law, as often has been said, is a living document. It reflects the times. So most bills are introduced in the chamber, so the Parliament. Sometimes they can be first introduced in the Senate, but that is rare. So generally, it begins kind of with the first reading. They introduce the bill, and that is actually when you get the number. So you're going to hear bills called by numbers, ultimately being called, given a name. But this is kind of when that whole starts, that whole process begins. It's chatted about, and they decide when they talk about it, when they read the title of the bill, they think what they want, they decide whether or not it's worthy of going forward. Is there enough people, enough votes to say, okay, let's do that? And so that's what happens. And then they debate it. They talk about it, they look at it, what are the strengths and weaknesses of what they're presenting, and then they vote um, to see what's going to happen, whether or not it's going to be examined. And if they say yes, so there's all things they can say no, they can say yes, X, obviously no. Uh, and sometimes there's a question mark or something that comes up that is important, and that may actually lead later on to like a change or amendment. So let's say it goes to they have their debate, second reading. Okay, let's look into this farther. And then they send it to what we call the committee stage, the next stage, and the report stage. So for the sake of time, I'm going to do both of those at the same time. Second stage, when it gets to the committee, when it gets to the committee in the committee stage and the report stage, they're going to bring in witnesses. They're going to hear from experts. They may hear from the people who are impacted. Why are we having this bill in the first place? Those kind of questions. And they're also going to look and change what are called amendments. So maybe there's one party that's really excited about this new law, but there's other parties who have concerns about part of it. And this is what happens. This is kind of the giving and taking and the sorting out. And sometimes some parts are removed from the first kind of bill presented. Some things are slightly changed, and some things are added that maybe the original bill didn't consider. So you can appreciate if this is a lengthy process. It takes a while, and it takes a lot of collaboration and willingness to work through things. So after that, they've gone through all this. Hopefully, they've addressed all the outstanding concerns, brought in more knowledge to hopefully create then what we would call to the next stage, then from this committee stage and report stage to the third reading. Now, the third reading generally is like the last writing of a bill. And now what often happens is people give impassioned, they have an impassioned debate, what I would call, like they kind of argue it out whether or not they still like the law or not, whether they think it should even happen. Some people right away may think, no, I don't even want to entertain any part of it. Maybe it's a minority, maybe it's a majority. Sometimes they change their mind. And who are they? The representatives in the parliament, the people we voted in to go to Parliament and represent us. That's what happens in the third reading. And what I'm going to do in a few minutes is show you an example of a couple laws, rights that have happened, changes that happen that you've read about in folder B and C. And you're going to see what other parts are interesting about the process that was not covered in that material. So I'm using previous material, so hopefully it enriches your understanding. So the third reading happens. Now, let's say it's passed. They get the percentage. It's majority rules, by the way, and then it's passed. It goes then to the Senate. And now what happens in the Senate is basically the same process. I say step one. These aren't actually steps technically, but just for the sake of learning. Basically, they go through the same process. They read it, they debate it, they talk about it. Now, they can actually not like parts of it. And if they don't, then what they can do is they can send it back to the House. It doesn't happen that often, but they can send it back to the House of Commons for approval. So again, another vote. You never know. Remember, though, senators are not voted in. Only members of Parliament are voted in. But let's just say, though, they did okay it. They were fine with it right away or even thereafter. And then it moves from the bill sent to the chamber, right here. I didn't make a circle around it, to the final step, which is to what we call the royal assent. This is basically formality at this point, but it's a big deal. And it's certainly a big deal when it's a law that a lot of Canadians want to see change. It's an important law if people are being able now to have rights and protection that they never have. And throughout Canada's history, there's been many bills that have become law that have changed the fabric of our country and for the better. I want to make sure that you read the history of Canada's Parliament. It's a short little video. It's in your folder. It's kind of a fun thing. Explains why we have the crown in Canada, what it actually means. We're a member of the Commonwealth, so you may want to take a look at that. But once again, the two main areas, we have the House of Commons and we have the Senate. And this is just how this is where the House of Commons, what it looks like, where our laws and life of Canada is debated. And here is the Senate, often called the Red Room. It's very red, it's very regal. And just so you know, these are very separate entities, right? They even have different buildings. So I'm sure you all have seen or heard of the Parliament of Canada in Ottawa. You could always go there and take tours. It's obviously an important part of our life in Canada. And then you have the Senate, which again is in a separate building. And the Senate building as well can also be toured if you ever go to Ottawa. Both are in Ottawa. The Senate, though, just a little moment about the Senate. The Senate actually is the senators who are appointed by the the Governor General, is done on the advice of the Prime Minister. And they try to get senators who are from the different regions of Canada. And here they are here. You can just take a look at those yourself. And so that is the process. That's a system, and it's time consuming. And I can't stress enough, the most important law is our Constitution and the Charter of Rights in Canada, highest order. And any law that might be made, maybe it's made maybe it's made in its past, everything happens. If there's a person or a law, somebody in Canada states then that law the word would be contravenes the Charter of Rights, that law can very quickly be considered invalid. Because if it doesn't align and respect the Charter of Rights and Freedom, our Constitution, then they will not kind of live long in Canada. And so usually when laws are being made up, they're thinking about that. They're thinking about, that's the stuff that they'd be debating, that they'd be looking at. Do these laws align with the Charter of Rights and Freedom in our Canada? And of course, that's important. Something Canada can be proud of. Some other things, remember, I want you to listen to the videos on the Charter of Rights and Freedom, look at that material. But this is all the different types of freedoms that they give you. Press. The other thing is the right to who you worship, and this is going to come into play in just a moment, you'll see. So the charter is really important. So let's look at example at a couple of our course content that aligns with our course objectives. So you can see then what I just mapped out, how this actually looks in reality, what it looks like with an example of what is happening. All right, so here we go. Bill C-150. This bill was tabled. It began its long process between 1968 and 1969. A couple things I'm going to point to you. First of all, it was considered an omnibus bill. And what that usually means, it's a volume containing several items. Historically, some governments, I should say, have put in a lot of different items in a bill so that hopefully some of them would pass. Some may say that that was the deal behind Bill C-150, but regardless, it contained many, many areas of law that radically changed really the fabric for gender and sexuality in Canada, sexual orientation primarily. And most of the amendments were to the Criminal Code of Canada. That was what this was all about. It was a massive bill, and that was the idea, to amend the Criminal Code of Canada. Words that are often used when we talk about law, I should have said this first, are like to enact new laws, which we did just talk about. To repeal means to totally get rid of a law, erase it, for better or worse term. And amend means to change or add. So the law stays, but they may take out one part, add another part, or just take some parts out. So that's kind of language used around law. So this one had to do a lot. Let's just look at the issue of for women. So the two main persons at the time, 68, 69, were our Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, so Justin Trudeau's father, and then the Minister of Justice. And ministers of justice are really important people when it comes to government and legislation. So at the time it was John Turner, and John Turner, by the way, would eventually also become a prime minister in Canada. So what happened with this bill C-150? So here we have it. Think of all the different steps. This bill went through all the same steps. It passed in the third reading, which is obviously what you want, because after that, as you know, it's sent to for royal assent to be, well, then it's sent to the Senate, who passed it as well, and then it went on for royal assent. Couple of more important things. First of all, for the issue for women, and I would say men as well, at the time, was the point to decriminalize the sale and use of contraception. So it was no longer illegal to use contraception, to sell it, to advertise it, and also to advise. So doctors who would have advised the use of contraceptions were also legally, criminally responsible. I don't know if you realize that. So here was the ultimate vote, 149 in favor of the law and 55 against. So this is important. Who is for and who is against? Another important thing about Canada, our laws are changing, and so, by the way, our political parties, and I'll show you that too. So a lot of times when you look at these old results for legislation and voting, you're going to see different parties involved, which is interesting, I think. So Bill C-150, however, legalized abortion. So they didn't completely decriminalize abortion at this time in 1969. That wouldn't happen until 1988, if you can believe that. And that doesn't mean that the idea it's a matter of choice. This course and any other course that you study these very personal issues is more about people having choice. It's not about changing our own values, our ethics, or our religious morality. If that's how you feel about these topics, it's about choice. So what happened then in 1969, they decriminalized abortion, but now there was a different process in place. And the reason why this was largely due to the strong influence of the Catholic Church's moral position in 1969 on abortion, and by the way, contraception too. And so what does this really mean? Well, these different regions of Canada, the people who run to be in Parliament, the people who are going to sit and vote, have their constituents to support and to kind of do what they want. So if these were people coming from areas where the Catholic Church held a lot of power and authority and persuasion, then those realities impact how your politicians vote, which is why even today you need to understand when you vote for people, what do they believe in? What do they stand for? So we use words today like lobbyists, special interest groups, influencers, but it's all the same, and it's always been the same. But Bill C-150, though, with that, created what women needed was to go before a committee of 3 doctors to request the right to have legal abortion. And there's lots of information regarding the problems with that. I won't get into it at this point, but it wasn't really what was hoped for. The hope was to have a completely decriminalization of it, and that would happen eventually, as I mentioned earlier. So remember, political parties have their platforms. So do people, and they're raised by individuals. They can also be raised by a big significant event that happens in a region of Canada that maybe even is the reason why a new bill is being drafted. I think often about like environmental disasters. I know it has nothing to do with this course, but when a huge environmental disaster happens in regions of Canada, and that brought about the need to create new bills and new laws. And interestingly, also, new parties, which we're going to look at in 2 minutes. So remember, life is moving forward, the world is changing, so are our politics, and therefore, so are our laws and bills. So here's an example. This is just a little picture from the internet from 2019. Those were and are today still the main parties in Canada. Now, compare that to the ones I just showed you who voted, and they were simply, oh, I haven't showed you. Let's go next to that. So how did people vote? By the way, this bill, remember, omnibus bill, covered a lot of areas, covered all of this too. So it was stacked with different issues. So the hope was the regions of the country wanted these things, they're willing to give and take in order to get those things. That's kind of the reason they do those. Throw a whole bunch of stuff in there, see what sticks, and then kind of sneaking things in. This, by the way, was the first time they had in the criminal code breathalyzer tests for drinking and driving. First time ever in that act. John Turner, described it as one of the most all-embracing reform to the criminal and penal law ever attempted. To this day, actually, it's considered the most socially progressive bill that came into law. So what were the outcomes? This is what I'm going to show you. So remember, in 1969, these are the only parties in Canada. Liberal, progressive, conservatives, by the way, and New Democrats. Here's who we have today. So again, politics are also evolving. And here was the vote. So you could pause now and take a look at it, but you can clearly see which parties of the time, first of all, that had power in Parliament, right? You can tell that by the seats, how many people. You can see how they voted here. And you can see the for and against. So voted for 149, voted against 55. Sometimes people abstain. Some people are absent. And so those are kind of an interesting outcome. So pretty strong vote in favor of this bill, which eventually obviously became law. So once again, evolving different ones. So just some information for you, like little facts. And if you look at, nothing happens in Canada, nothing happens anywhere in the world unless there's a reason for it. That's just life. So there was no such thing as a Green Party in 1969, but the Green Party of Canada was founded in 1983. And if you look around the world, that is when you're going to see different things happening in terms of our environment. Can't get into it in this course, but it was environmental concerns for the earth and our environment that created this new party. Also issues regarding the progressive conservative at the time. So eventually in 2003, they would become just the Conservative Party. You can see that on the right. I put that in yellow. And then before that, in 1991, a new party came about, the Bloc Québécois, and that was taking members and votes from both the progressive conservatives at the time and the liberals. So you see the moving around taking place. And again, there's always independence. So I show you this because this also tells us something about Canada. The big bill changed obviously for contraceptions, which was a big thing for women. Even decriminalizing abortions was a step forward, not perfect, but it certainly was a step forward to the area that will just go in terms of what we might call queer history. You spend a lot of time on this study, exploring this content in folder B. So I want to focus on a couple parts of this content now. So Bill C-33. So I'll go back again. So excuse me, I'll go back here. So what the Bill C-150 did was decriminalize homosexuality across, here it is here. It decriminalized homosexual acts nationwide. So this did not create all the rights and entitlements and protections for that population of citizens, but it did start things going. And that's why Trudeau was famously quoted as saying, "There's no place for the state in the bedroom of the nation." adding that what's done in private between adults doesn't concern the criminal code. And you would have explored this in your previous folder. So just some other key points, just to kind of reinforce what you've already learned, but to understand that all these changes happen primarily, changes that are safe and legal happen because of law. So 1966, Bill C-33, the federal government passes that bill, which adds sexual orientation to the Canadian Human Rights Act. Up until then, sexual orientation was not part of the original Canadian Human Rights Act. We have a Canadian Human Rights Act, and we also have provincial Human Rights Act. They usually go hand in hand. They have to sometimes change with each other. Sometimes a province pushes a change in the Human Rights Acts. Sometimes it's federal, but again, eventually they all align up. And so that changed, added that. So that would be an amendment to our Canadian Human Rights Act. They didn't get rid of it, they added to it. So that was an important change. Sexual orientation, 1966. Sorry, no, I went backwards here. All right. 1999 now, moving forward even farther. Same-sex couples have the same benefits and obligations as opposite-sex common law couples, which means that if you're working and you're in a relationship, a partner, and you have benefits, then you're entitled to those same benefits. You should be seen under the law as respected the same as a heterosexual couple. 1999, another change, that the judge rules that the definition before had violated the Charter of Rights and Freedom regarding man and woman. So here you see a huge change now occurring as a result of a provincial request to change something. They change it and they look at that law and say, wait a minute, that law, the way it's written is not legal. And so they need to then go back and change the language of that law that they just passed to respect and uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So here's where they change the word spouse from a man or a woman to encompass or include a person of the opposite sex or the same sex. So basically any couple who saw themselves as a couple. And when this happened, Ontario had to go back after the Charter's decision in 1999 and fix their act. So they don't have to do it overnight, but they have to go back and make the amendment to their act. Again, I show you this only to show you how even when laws pass, it may still not be right according to the Charter. Next big one I want to just talk about, also for political reasons, I want to show you this. So the Civil Marriage Act, that's what the act is called today, but originally it was Bill C-38. So that was in 2005. So you can see the progression of legal rights and protections and respect and integrity given to a population of Canada that had been for hundreds of years terribly discriminated against and also harmed. So the federal government at that time introduced its same-sex marriage bill in the House of Commons. So that's where it began. Remember the whole process. The bill, which was written, gave married same-sex partners the same legal recognition as other married couples. But here's the part that would have come up in the amendment going back. So on the one hand, yes, the right, same rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedom. However, also, if you recall, under the Charter of Rights and Freedom is the right to celebrate your own religion, your own culture. So a fair bit of the opposition related to groups, therefore representatives in the House whose constituents did not agree with that because of their strong held religious beliefs regarding same-sex marriages. Yes, in 2005, and it continues today, there's still people who oppose this. So the question then is, how do you pass a bill? So remember, it goes through stages. Often the concerns are legitimate. Often the concerns are comparing and contrasting and conflicting with different groups and rights that are all part should be respected under our Charter of Rights and Freedom. And so at the time, the Prime Minister was Prime Minister Paul Martin. Here's a picture of Paul Martin. And here's just a little fun fact. Paul Martin was actually spent a few of his years as a child in Windsor, Essex County. So therefore, part of the bill then was changed. The language is changed to reflect then other rights under the Charter of Rights. So part of it read, no church, no temple, no synagogue, no mosque, no religious official will be asked or forced to perform a marriage that is contrary to their beliefs. So that became part of the legislation to hopefully support the different kind of rights, charter rights of Canadians. But take a look here now at those votes. People think it was really awesome, great, and it is. But the question then, how strong of a yes vote did the Civil Marriage Act in Canada really give? So here you have kind of the flow. You can see all of this now on the internet, which is amazing. You can hear the speeches. So Paul Martin, the Prime Minister of the time, he spoke. Remember, people speak in the third reading. You can see that circled. They speak. Everybody speaks. They debate, and then they vote. So Paul Martin spoke as the Prime Minister. Take a look there. Stephen Harper, who was in the head of the Conservative Party at the time. He wasn't Prime Minister then, but he did become Prime Minister. And then you can see everyone else who spoke. And then they would do their vote. And here is the outcome here. You can see very slim. So in 2005, those present in the Parliament who were asked to vote on whether or not to pass the Bill C-38, which was the Civil Marriage Act, you can see then the results. And what's interesting is who voted yes and who voted no. I took a quick look. So Windsor, Essex, Windsor West for the federal government. Brian Massey, by the way, who is still the representative of Windsor West in 2024 in the federal government, voted yes to the law at that time as well. But you can go online and you can see how everyone voted and in what region, which is interesting. It's very interesting. Look at that. I think that's extremely close. But then that wasn't enough, right? Then it had to go to the Senate. Remember, the Senate also has its, areas, as I mentioned, of the country that it represents. So they would eventually also pass it. So again, and once they passed it, they didn't go through any amendments. It went right off to the royal assent to become a law. But here are the numbers in the Senate. A little stronger, 69 in favor and 69% in favor and 30% against. But it didn't become law. And as you can see, even just looking at these few little examples, laws change, politics change. I mean, big political changes, new policy, new parties in Canada. Maybe you had never really thought about that. Why parties separate and change is interesting. Not the scope of this course, but also very interesting. The other place I want to finish with, and I want to leave you with, is how does these are big laws, but how else do these laws impact our lives? Well, if you're in school and you were thinking about a profession, anything in the medical field, all professions have associations in colleges. I shouldn't say that. They don't all have colleges. For instance, nurses have colleges. You usually have to register. You have to stay in good standing. If you're in the social service program, social work and social service workers are licensed. They're registered. They also are responsible then for various regulations and a code of conduct. Interestingly, the college system of teachers do not have a professional association in college, but usually places where you're going to work do. Engineers do, obviously medicine. You might even be aware of some too. So again, so there's federal, so you have national, but you also have because I know the social service worker program, but every province has one. And that's the same for, I should have mentioned that too, for nurses. There's often a federal association, but every college in every province also is required to be registered, which means licensing. And when you are, then you need to uphold the changes also that happen in your profession. And you think about over time what's happened. Think about informed consent for treatment. Think about what they used to do to, and I'm going to use the terms of before, what they used to do to people who they identified as homosexual historically, the types of medical treatments that they would force on them. So in our day, we may not think it's a big deal, but it certainly has been a big deal to be able to say no, to be able to have an advocate, and all of those things. Code of ethics always flow from laws and legislations when we're talking about professional bodies, what you can do, what you can't do. And then what happens if you don't follow the core values and codes? What happens to individuals working within those professions? Can't get into all that, but I want you to know that it's there. It's available. It's available if it's part of it if you belong to that profession, but it's also important if you actually are getting support and help from someone in that professional field. You need to know, again, what you're entitled to, your rights as a consumer even, or as just a person. So laws and their policies are everywhere. And whether you care about the poop in your parks, I just wanted to say that, or not, but you probably do care about harassment and violence in your workplace, in your classroom. These are laws that have come forward because of serious life events that have taken place. Most laws come about because of an issue, sometimes from a tragedy. And as you can see, there's a long process involved in getting them, but they're worth it generally. And you have a say. When any new law, or we should say bill, is being discussed, you reach out to your member of parliament. That is your right. They are there. You vote for them, and so then you can feel like you're actually a part in the process and what you're doing. That's why it matters to vote. So check out the other material within the folder. Reflect on the previous content that you've now studied. Understand where and how all those changes happen. Learn from it, grow from it, as I like to say, and if and when, make changes. But whatever, continue to learn and to be a good citizen of the world. Thank you for listening.